And welcome to another episode of Patriots 4th and 2. I am your host today, Derek Havens. Joining me, as always, is Mr. Steve Balish. We are both PatsFans.com bloggers. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about the back end of the defense. We'll be doing our secondary prospect preview, our fourth and final of our preview breakdowns, although we are going to be doing a mock draft and hopefully get a good guest on in the next week or two before the draft. We have a couple other topics we're going to start with before we get into that. But as always, Steve, how are we doing today?
We're doing good. Beautiful day outside. And, we're cutting down those days to the draft. It's right around the corner now, and I'm sure you are too. I'm very excited because there's so much unknown going into this one of how that first round's going to play out. I think, anybody's guess will be way off this year.
There's something about this draft, Steve, and I'm sure I'm going to hate it. It probably will affect the Patriots, but there's just no way the draft goes as chalk as everybody's talking. I feel like, the conversation for months, and as much as you and I love the draft, we talked about it a little bit last week, but there's definitely a little bit of draft fatigue. I feel like, some of the conversations, not this podcast because we're great and entertaining, but I feel like you feel like you're having the same conversation every single day, every single week. And, some of the same prospects you kind of see pegged to the same places. I just don't think it's going to happen that cleanly. It never does. It never does. And so I don't know if it's going to be the Patriots, I know everyone's favorite surprise, if you're, an NFL analyst, is JJ McCarthy at 3. I'm not sure it's quite that. Could be, but I think there's going to be something in the top 6, 7, 8 picks that shake something up big time, and I don't think people are anticipating it well. But that's the draft for you. There's always a curveball somewhere in there.
Yeah, absolutely, and the JJ McCarthy talk has thrown everything into even a deeper spin now, because a lot of people have him going much earlier in the draft than we had initially,
predicted.
Predicted, thought, where he would go. But
have you warmed up to him at all?
I think he has all those leadership abilities. He's got good physical talent. The one thing that I keep going back to with him is, he has a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. We know that. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't have that touch because he throws everything 90 miles an hour. You know what I mean? Yep. And that's the thing that I worry about with him. Is he going to be able to learn that at the pro level? But
I put him in the same category I put everybody else, in terms of there's things I can talk myself into, and there's things that, scare me at the same time. And I would say the same thing about Drake May or Jaden Daniels or Caleb Williams. And I do like those other 3 more than him.
Mm-hmm.
But there are things about each of these quarterback prospects that I like and scare me at the same time.
Oh yeah.
And that's just what it is. But you know what? I've come down to it with the Patriots that you can't hit a home run if you don't take a swing. So you have to do it. I mean, you have to go for it. If they feel that unconfident in their analysis, evaluations, then trade down, take a safe pick like Joe Alt. Whatever. I'm okay with that. If they do something like, if they trade down, or if they take again, I'll use Joe Alt as an example. If they trade down or they take someone like that, it will tell me they did not feel strong enough about their evaluation of these quarterback prospects to justify spending that kind of capital on that player. Do you agree with that?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, because, the talk has been nothing about anything else except, the quarterback prospects this year at the top of the draft. And with them needing one, I mean, that would be an indictment of, well, maybe not Caleb Williams, because they've never expected him to
be there.
fall
Yeah.
down to their
He won't be there, but it's okay.
yeah. But it
I'm
would
pretty
tell
sure he's a
you,
native of DC anyway, so even if he gets by one,
yeah,
somehow, some way, there's no way Adam Peters and Doug Quinn are passing on him.
yeah.
So,
But that would tell you all you need to know, right? So,
right. Let me ask you
but
this.
well, I go back to what you said a minute ago. Wayne Gretzky talked about scoring, and he said you miss 100% of the shots
you don't take. Yep, I totally agree. Totally agree. And I feel like, look, it's important the Patriots hit on this selection. Obviously, if they don't, it's a different conversation. But I still think it's going to be a quarterback. It's still kind of trending that way. Where do you feel like? How do I want to classify this? Where do you feel like? Are you still leaning into your quarterback rankings? Are you still leaning Drake May, or
Yeah.
Has anything changed?
No, I mean, look, I think, we assume Caleb Williams is going number 1 to the Bears, and I haven't heard or read or seen anything that would change me of that. So, I'm assuming that either Jaden Daniels or Drake May is going to fall to the Patriots at 3. There's so many different mock drafts that have one or the other going at number 2. I think they can work with either one of those guys. I think both of them are going to have a high ceiling. Now, there is some issues with both of them. I think we both agree on that.
Yeah, we do.
I just think Drake May fits what we believe is going to be Alex Van Pelt's offense better in New England. Now, that's not to say that Jaden Daniels isn't a really good football player. He might even be better than May in the NFL. We don't know. We'll have to see how that plays out. I just think May fits the Patriots better. And so I've been on him since October. I mean, I've said that many times. So I'm kind of sticking with that. We'll see how it all plays out.
What do you think about this? I guess I'll call it a smoke screen, but man, it seems like every other article I read, almost like week to week, is like, oh, Adam Peters loves Drake May. Like they're going to take Drake May for sure. And then it's like Jaden Daniels, 100%. Like it's going back and forth at 2 for who they want. Do you feel that? Because I feel like it's constant, it's constantly one of those guys that is like, oh, Adam Peters loves this guy. It's going to be the second pick, 100%.
Yeah. Well, then, then we read that Elliot Wolf loves J.J. McCarthy.
Yep.
So, I mean, I
still wonder if some of that's Harbaugh. I still do. I don't know. I feel like he's blowing some smoke up somebody's sundress. So I don't know.
But at the same time, I don't want to badmouth anybody in the media. I mean, because we write stuff, and
sure,
it's all opinion based. So I mean, we go on our own gut feelings. But I can't help but
Mike Giardi, who used to work for NFL Network and now works for Boston Sports Journal with Greg Bedard's site. And I'm not, saying this in a mean way, or anything, but like he came out very emphatically the other day, basically saying that like the Patriots like JJ McCarthy, and that's a fact. And he had them in the mock draft, taking him, and that might be true. I mean, I'm sure there are things to like about him. We say this, you and I say this all the time. And it's the truth. We can sit here and look over guys and study this draft and study the classes, but we can't sit down with these guys and we don't do the medicals. So I don't want to give us a pass on some of these things, but sometimes we can't, do that. And, there was a conversation about Michael Penix coming around earlier this week, talking about how much he impressed and, really did well in like some of these coaching, interviews. And that doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, he was, one of the elite. He was the quarterback of one of the elite football programs in the entire country this year. Everyone looks like they would run through a brick wall for him. I love Penix. I know our buddy Murphy loves Penix, you know. So like, you know, like I
Well,
can talk myself into a lot of these guys. It's a talented class, you know, but that doesn't mean there's not flaws.
Yeah, and the funny thing about him is a lot of people were down on him for his throwing motion.
Not anymore.
And somebody wrote the other day, I forget who it was, so I would love to give him credit for it, but they said they put on a tape of him and then they kind of reversed it so it looked like he was throwing right-handed.
Right.
And then his motion looked just fine. It was just because there's so few left-handed quarterbacks that his motion looked weird, you know, when you're watching the tape of him, because it was, you know, kind of alien to what we see most of. But when they reversed the tape, that his throwing motion looked just fine. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to take a second to go ahead and ask everyone to please subscribe to us on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. Like, share, leave us a review wherever you download your podcasts. Helps us keep us high in the podcast rankings and help other Patriots fans find us. You know, Steve, I guess we're going to talk about. You want to start with Logan Ryan or Kyle Duggar?
Let's start with Duggar.
Okay, 4 years, $58 million. What does that equal out to? Like
it's about
14 and a half.
Million. Yeah.
So the transition tag was like 13 and a half. So it's about $1 million a year more than that. He is, you know, one of the, actually, this is a good point for the quarterback conversation because some of these things do matter. You know, Kyle Duggar is about to be 20, he's almost 29. And this is his first real contract, you know, so how I want to, you know, kind of transition it and relate it to the quarterback conversation is I think those things do matter. You know, Kyle Duggar comes out of, you know, Lenore Ryan, second round draft pick. He's 24 years old. Well, someone like Jaden Daniels, for example, just real quick. I know this is, you know, kind of all over the board, but, you know, it's me, so whatever. Jaden Daniels is 24. He's had like 55, 56 starts, whatever it is, you know, in college. Drake May's only 21. Okay, so like when they're coming up on their second contract, these guys, you know, now Kyle Duggar, for example, he's a in the box, strong safety, kind of old school, put his helmet in there. He's 29. This is probably the only big contract he's going to get. So he was digging his heels in. So when they're making these quarterback evaluations for Drake May or JJ McCarthy versus Jaden Daniels, Michael Penix, guys who are 3-4 years older than them, it matters. It matters a lot. It matters a lot. So I definitely think people should factor that kind of thing in when they're talking about this, you know, having these conversations. Sorry, I know that's kind of random, but it was kind of related to what we were talking to. But it does matter because that's why Kyle Duggar, from what I had heard, Steve, that's why Kyle Duggar was so emphatic on making sure that he got some kind of guaranteed money. He wanted to go ahead and secure himself, as he should. You know, and he got what he wanted. You know, tell me your reaction to the deal. Do you feel like the money was fair, and your thoughts on the player?
Well, I've always liked the player. You know, I think he's an outstanding player, and he showed he's versatile. He can do a lot of things, and the Patriots really pride their. Excuse me. They pride their defensive guys on their versatility. Well, everybody, not just defensive, but you know what I'm saying. And Duggar has been a really solid playmaker for them. He's played in the box. He's played dime linebacker. He's played free safety last year. So he can do a bunch of things. Plus, he's a leader on and off the field, and they've seen that in him. So I think it's a great move for the Patriots because you'll lock up another one of your cornerstone guys, you know. He's still young enough where he's got probably, you know, 6 or 7 years left in him. We'll see how it all plays out. But at least for the time being, you know, one of your cornerstone guys is locked up for the next 4 years. And it sounded like he wanted to remain. He just wanted to get paid. So I don't have any issue with that whatsoever. I was glad they were able to keep him. You know, you and I talked back in January that he was one of the free agents that we hoped they could retain we didn't think they'd be able to retain Onwenu and Duggar, but lo and behold, they've done that.
I'm glad you brought that up because I do want to mention this, and we'll get to Logan Ryan, and then we can take a quick break, and then we'll do our prospect breakdown. But there's going to be a lot of criticism on the Patriots. There already has been by media, by fans. Look, there's multiple ways that you can count to 8. It can be 1 + 7, 4 + 4, 2 + 6, whatever. And what I mean by that is that, everyone has their opinion on how they should rebuild this team. And there's a lot of different ways that they can get there. And we'll see if this regime, we'll see if they can do what they're supposed to do. But one of the things that I'm very happy they have started with is I feel like the contracts they have given out to their own guys feels refreshing. I guess I would use the word refreshing. It's nice that they have identified players in that building. Say, yeah, we are not a good football team right now, but we're going to go ahead and reward our homegrown guys. We're going to make sure they're here for the next few years while this new regime gets settled, and then we're going to go ahead and rebuild it. But they're starting with the foundational pieces that are already in place. And I feel like it just feels nice because for whatever reason, Bill towards the end really couldn't do that. I mean, we talked about it earlier in the offseason that it was 10 years before a player that was drafted in the first 3 rounds that was retained to a second contract until Josh Uche. And now you have Onwenu. I know he's 6th rounder, so I guess it's a little different, but you have like Kyle Duggar now, like who was a 2nd round pick. I think he was 37th overall. Like, it just feels like it's kind of a sigh of relief, Steve, that I feel like you're seeing things kind of taking a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And look, a lot of people, when they said, well, they need a rebuild, they wanted to replace 53 guys, and you just can't do that.
No, of course not.
Yeah, and their roster, especially on the defensive side of the ball, is not bad. I think people lost track of that a little bit when they seen all these guys resigning because, they're talking about holes in the roster. Well, if you let the guys who played really well go, that opens even more holes in your roster. And, I said they identified who they thought were key players and they wanted to retain, and they've done that. So I don't have any issue with that. Now we'll have to see how everything fits back together because they're getting ready to add some new guys, through the draft and then undrafted guys, and we'll see where they're at in a couple of weeks.
It's getting close, man. I'm so excited. I am so excited because you and I are gonna rip into film like nobody's business when these guys are selected, and I'm just excited. I guess I'm anxious is kind of it's not really the word I want to use, but man, I'm just looking forward to seeing what direction these guys want to go. And there's a lot of different ways they could go. But let's quickly take, a second and talk about, Logan Ryan, retiring after 11 years in the NFL. Give me your thoughts on his retirement, him as a player, whatever you want to go.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought he was an outstanding football player. He wasn't,
We both liked him coming out of school too.
Yeah, he wasn't a great football player like a perennial All-Pro, but he was a really, really good football player. And
solid
he fit in with the Patriots perfectly. He won a couple of Super Bowls with them in his first 4 years, and then he went elsewhere. But he was a solid player for the rest of his career, and he played for a couple of different teams, but he had an 11-year career, had a couple of Super Bowls. I mean, that's an excellent send-off for a guy who, again, we both really liked when he got on the team years ago, and wish him all the best.
I've had the pleasure of meeting Logan twice. Had a good conversation with him both times. Man, just a really solid guy overall. I would say most of the guys that walk through that locker room, really all across the league, but specifically the Patriots, like most guys are good dudes. You get your Brian Storks every once in a while, but most of the guys are pretty solid. Um, didn't mean for Brian Stork to catch a stray, but he was kind of a dickhead. But I, but Logan's was a really good dude, and versatility. I mean, he was kind of the start of the prototypical Rutgers versatile Belichick jokes that you want to throw around. But man, he really just, I mean, he had a heck of a career. I mean, your average career in the NFL is 3.5 years. He was there for 11. Did some good community work. Had his wife and kids. So man, I think it makes me feel old that he's already retiring from the league. We've been doing this podcast for basically his entire career. So that's a little funny, but I would say hats off to him. That's pretty awesome. Anything else, Steve, that you want to touch on before we get into our prospect breakdown? We do have time. We were cognizant of the time, but we do have some time if there's anything that you want to touch on.
No, I think that's a good spot to take our break here. And
okay.
Yeah, we'll get into our secondary guys.
All right, let's do it. We'll be right back. We're taking a break for podcast purposes, and we'll be back right after this. All right, and we're back here on Patriots 4th and 2. Derek Haven, Steve Balistrieri here. Steve, right before we get into our prospect breakdown, let me ask you this question. And this is a little random. No wrong answers. We know about the Patriots' big three. We talk about the big three all the time in terms of needs for the team. Quarterback, receiver, tackle. Put them in whatever order you want. Give me your next need as of now.
I would say boundary cornerback, excuse me.
I think corner, I think tight end, we talked about tight end earlier a couple weeks ago before Austin Hooper and the Henry moves were kind of made as being like a sneaky need. I feel like cornerback is still being not talked about enough. And I know they took Christian Gonzalez at 17 last year, and I'm excited for his second season. I mean, he's a heck of a player. It was kind of a freak shoulder injury in Dallas, whatever. But Jonathan Jones is not getting any younger. He probably has some time left. But I hope he goes back to his home, quote unquote, in the slot. They need another cornerback.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and you and I have talked about this offline several times. I think, it's a sneaky need because they had Jonathan Jones there last year. And then, Miles Bryant manned the slot because Marcus Jones was injured and out. Now, Miles Bryant is gone. I think they're best served with having Marcus and, Jonathan Jones in the slot. They have some other depth guys, but they could really use another boundary corner. I was kind of hoping they'd bring back Stephon Gilmore, at least for a year or two.
That's kind of what I was hoping too.
Yeah, and that way there, they can draft a guy and develop him. They're not throwing him into the fire right away.
But I don't know what kind of money he wants, and not that matters for the Patriots or really to us fans. I don't really care about what kind of money they give him or don't give him. But my point is, they probably would have to pay him a little bit more than maybe a team that's closer to a championship run because he's at the end of his career. So I assume he would rather not go for it, with a team that's going to win probably less than 6 games. So it's, I get it, it's going to be tough.
Yeah. And the bottom line is, I mean, maybe if they sign him, they might steal another game or two out there, right?
Oh, I think he could. And you have talked about this before. The defense is pretty solid. I mean, I'd like to see them add another edge rusher. I'd like to see them add another boundary corner. Maybe a little bit more of a free safety type.
Yep.
Okay, those three things. Now, about this class specifically, this draft class, it's weird with corners. I think you have about 5-ish boundary corners that are gonna go probably in the first 40, 45 picks. And then I feel like it drops off significantly. But I do think that slot corners, which won't be valued as high by teams, they'll probably go, probably start going late day 2. There'll be a run on slot corners, and there's a ton of really good players in that category. So that'll be kind of interesting. As far as safeties, it's not a big safety class. I mean, you have your Tyler Nubin from Minnesota's, one of my favorites. He's one of everybody's favorites. He's just a good, solid football player. I still like Cam Kitchens from the University of Miami. I know he didn't test well, but honestly, I would just say just throw on a couple Miami games and just watch him play. I mean, he's a good player, so you can take the combine and shove it. I'll still roll with him, and I think you're going to be able to get him at good value. But we'll get into it, here in a second. But I do think that there are some potentially interesting options, and while the Patriots, I don't anticipate them, Steve, taking a cornerback, one of those top 5 boundaries. I wonder if they would go with another corner because Marcus Jones is an okay corner prospect. He's a better special teamer. Still has value on the team. I still want him on the team, but they could use another slot guy either to kind of groom behind Jonathan Jones, or they could keep Jonathan Jones on the outside opposite of Christian Gonzalez and get another rookie in that slot. And I think just in terms of kind of where the board's going to fall, that might be the path to go.
Sure. I mean, again, it's going to depend on DeMarcus Covington, how he sees the defense evolving along with Mayo.
Sure.
How they're going to play. Are they going to play, more of a zone coverage this year? Are they going to stick with a lot of, man-to-man coverage? I mean, because that will definitely play into, who they like in the draft, because there's some really good zone coverage guys. There's some really good man coverage guys, and there's always those guys who can do both, which, if they can do both, then that they're going to raise up the draft board.
Sure. Well, let's start with this. Let's start with corners. We both do not believe there's really no corner. There's no defensive player, in my opinion, at all. That's at least on paper. I'm sure at some point hindsight will tell us everything we want to know, but I don't think there's a defensive player that's really valued at 3 overall in the draft. There's probably going to be 2 defensive players in the top 15. Like there's going to be like maybe 1 in the top 10, and everyone pencils in Dallas Turner to Atlanta like it's just like a done deal. And honestly, I just doubt it, because it doesn't seem like, it rarely seems like that kind of consensus and groupthink actually translates to the draft. But my point being, Steve, is that there's not a whole lot of defensive players that are going to be top 10 value worthy, for the Patriots. Yes, they could trade down, I suppose, and we're talking about it. I guess give me one of your favorite, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but give me one of your favorite defensive backs that could go in the first round, even if they're not with the Patriots, just one of your favorites.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the 2 cornerbacks from Alabama, Terrion Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry.
Yep.
And, I could see those guys, not so much top 10, but, in the 15 to 25 range.
Yep.
Going right off the board. And again, it'll depend how the board plays out. But I think those 2 guys are excellent cornerbacks. And
Terrion Arnold, to me, Steve, and I don't know what your opinion on him is, he kind of reminds me of just like, I don't want to, I guess I'll kind of compare him a little to like Logan Ryan, like we just talked about, but I don't mean in the versatility way. I mean just like I feel like he's just going to be a pretty solid player for a decade. I just think I think he's just a good solid player.
Yeah, and he has the potential to be a star.
Yeah.
And you already know he's had his feet in the fire because he played at Alabama. He plays in the SEC. He's played in big football games, and I think he's one of those guys that is not the sexy name that some of the other cornerbacks we've seen in the past. But I think he's set for a very long, good career in that.
Yeah, both Alabama cornerbacks, excuse me, are intriguing. I'd say Quinion Mitchell is a name that really didn't
he
stick
could
out.
be the first guy off the board.
I think he has a good chance because I just think that he has the highest ceiling. In my opinion, I think he is just so skilled. I like the edge he brings. I want my defensive backs to have all the cockiness in the world. Cockiness, confidence. I feel like Mitchell has some really interesting talent. I also love Nate Wiggins from Clemson. There's some concerns with him. For one, I'm worried about how much weight he carries, but he has a lot of, talk about like length and size, speed, whatever. I think he could be really, really talented if he can go ahead and hold up in the NFL. But I just don't think any of these guys will be, within striking distance, even at 34. I mean, I think you and I are probably higher on cornerback as a need than most people for whatever reason. I still would be like shocked if they took one, even at 34, Steve.
Yeah, I don't see that. Honestly, the earliest that I have them, that's where I started my prospects, is in the third round.
Yeah. Okay, so let's. I don't want to cheat the guys because there's a lot of players to talk about. But
there's some great ones. I'm just saying, I think because of the situation that they're in, they're going to be looking for prospects, for other positions early.
Do you agree with the statement that if they were to take a cornerback, let's say they take a cornerback at 34, just hypothetically, do you agree with the statement that if they were to do that, the player must have been ranked extremely high on their board and they were just like not expecting him to be there at that point where they were just like, we know it's not tackle or receiver that we also need help with, but this player is just too good to pass up on.
And that's a, dare I say it, that's a Bill Belichick thing, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't care where they drafted. If they had him high on their list and for any reason one of the, higher ranked corners starts to fall and he falls all the way to 34, I mean, it would be a surprise, but not a shock, to see them.
One of the things too that I feel like kind of gets by people sometimes, and look, like I'll use this as an example. A lot of people are talking about the Patriots trading down to like Minnesota and them getting 11-23 in next year's first round pick. I am steadfast and people who follow me on Twitter know this. I think that's not enough. Like to me personally, I know some people disagree, whatever, but like it doesn't matter like where you take a player. Like for example, Cole Strange. We like Cole Strange coming out of the draft a couple of years ago. We didn't think he was a first-round player. Everyone thought he was going in like the third or fourth round. Well, if you draft a player, it doesn't matter where you take them, but if they play well, if they're a good player, like no one cares if they end up taking somebody at 34 that we're all upset about. Like if they take JJ McCarthy at 3. Like if he can play well, it doesn't matter. They'll be proven right, or whatever.
Right.
Like no one cares about the spot where they're taken or how many picks were given up if they are a good player. It's all about whether they hit on the evaluation. And I don't think they'll be in a position.
Vollmer a few years ago.
That's a good one. 2009, 4 second-round draft picks. They took Patrick Chung, Darius Butler, Sebastian Vollmer, and who was the other one? I'll have to look it up. So great podcasting. But yeah, that was a fun draft.
Yeah, because Bill was panned for that pick, because they thought it was a huge reach, and then he had, what was it, 8 or 9 years where he was a really solid football player.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Give me let's start with the third round, players, because I think that makes more sense for the team. Talk about some of your favorite cornerbacks in that, or safeties. We can do both, but I figure we do
I figured
cornerbacks
we'd
and then go
start with
safeties.
corners. That's how
Yeah, let's do that.
took my notes.
Sure.
The first guy that jumps out, and I don't know whether he'd last till the third round, but TJ Tampa out of Iowa State, big guy, very physical. He's got that prototypical build that you look for in a boundary corner. He's got super instincts. He's physical, and he's excellent in press coverage. Which, if they stick with what their defense has been mostly, I think he'd be a really good addition.
Yeah, he's an interesting player. Again, we talked about this last week, and we'll see. But I'm fascinated to see what twists Mayo and Covington put on this defense. I think it will be relatively the same. They've basically said that, but there's going to be some differences, and so it'll be curious to see what players they identify for the scheme. Going forward. Mike Sandersill is one of my favorite players in the entire class from Michigan. He's more of a slot corner, but to me personally, Steve, he's everything that like I think Bill would draft him in a heartbeat, but he's not here. So I don't know what Elliott Wolf and Gerard Mayo are thinking, so, I don't know if that's their kind of fit. He probably also goes in the second round. I think he's just too good, even though he's more of a slot guy, but he's versatile. You can move him around. I love Mike Sandersill from Michigan.
That's a good pick too. See, I wasn't looking so much at slot guys as boundary guys.
Yep.
Because I thought if Jonathan Jones and Marcus Jones are both ready to go and healthy, the best thing would be for them to work the slot. So the next guy I liked, Kamal Haddon from Tennessee. He's 6'1", about 195. He's got the size, the length, ball skills. The only knock on him is he tends to be a little too physical, which, you can get away with in college, but, in the NFL, he'll have to tone that down a bit. But again, another guy I think can work his way right into the starting lineup and be a good, boundary corner at the next level.
I think there's a guy that could be there in the third round. I don't think he'd get to day 3. But one of the other players I really like is Javon Bullard from Georgia. And he kind of reminds me of Brian Branch, who came out of Alabama last year, where you could put him in multiple different roles and see him be successful. He's solidly built, not super tall, but he's always around the ball. I think he had somewhere in the mid 50s for tackles last season. He was, kind of banged up, but they moved him between cornerback, safety, whatever. I think Javon Bullard's going to be a good player. In the right scheme, I think he could be really interesting. For, again, another player for me that, yeah, he's a corner safety hybrid. I know we could use some more boundary corners, but I'm just looking at players that traditionally have fit well in New England. He looks like one of those guys that could fit right in.
Yeah, actually, I had Bullard down as a possible safety, a free safety for the Patriots.
Yeah, and to be if I really, I spent some time on these guys. I spend time on a lot of these different guys. It's not like you and I are sitting there doing cut up several hours of each of these players, but I can just see him fitting somewhere. If I really just spent time on just him, or if I was inside an NFL room, maybe I'm sure these guys will figure out where he's going to be. There is going to be someone in the front office in the NFL that's going to find a spot for him, and I think he is going to be really successful. A lot of people, like you said, have transitioned him to potentially a safety, and I think that would be a good fit too because his instincts are extremely clear on tape. You can just tell he's a guy who just knows where the ball is going to go, and he puts himself in position to be around it.
Yeah, I think his reaction skills when the ball is thrown, they're outstanding. And the thing about him is he could play deep safety. He can also match up in man coverage if when you're throwing different looks at the offense. I think he's an outstanding football player. Like you said, I think there's no shortage of teams that could find a way to make him a really viable player.
I really liked Elijah Jones a little bit later from Boston College, Steve. I thought he was kind of interesting. Real tall, real long. Production, I would say, he didn't test amazing. Production wasn't crazy, but he just looks like a guy that understands the game. And I thought Elijah Jones, if they're going to stay local, I thought for where they're going to potentially, assuming I'm sure they won't go chalk and go quarterback, receiver, tackle, one of the three in the first 3 rounds. I'm sure they won't. But if they do, I think that when you're talking about cornerback, where they would take one between the 4th and 7th round, I think that they could take corner pretty early, and I think Elijah Jones, early day 3, would be a pretty good pick for them.
Yeah, his tape at Boston College was really good, and my only argument with him, with like some of the other guys, is he's extremely physical, and I wonder, if that is going to be a detriment to him. At the next level.
Well, my thing that's the thing that scares me about him is for one he didn't have a great Senior Bowl.
No.
For two, he struggled last year in a pretty weak, conference overall. But regardless, there's still things about him that I like, and I do respect. What's his name? Who left Boston College to be the last head coach of Boston College. I'm blanking. Terrible show. Sorry, guys. I'm blanking on everybody. But yeah, whoever the coach was left Boston College. I have a lot of respect for him, and I feel like he came from a good program overall before Bill O'Brien took over. By the way, did you see Bill over at University of Washington?
Yes. I thought that was cool.
He's going to be there a lot, I feel like, just given his son being the DC and all.
Yeah, the only other knock I have on Elijah Jones is his age. He's 24.
He is. And look, I do think one of the underlying side effects of COVID and NIL is that there's more incentive for some of these guys to stay in school, and if they can get endorsement deals or do whatever, and they do have more eligibility, they can transfer without penalty. There's a lot of different things now in the college game that do affect those things. And again, I know some people will think like, oh, he's 21, he's 24. What's the difference? It matters, especially when you're talking about, here's another thing too. I'm kind of all over the board, but stay with me. This draft isn't like super deep. Like there are positions that will be taken later. Like, for example, I don't think there's going to be a running back taken in the first 2 rounds, but I think there's some really good running backs that'll be in like the 3rd or 4th round. And like cornerback, like we talked about, there's going to be like 5 really good boundary corners. And then I think it's going to probably take a little bit of a break and then probably get into your smaller guys. Well, I do think that the last round or 2 of this draft isn't as deep as where the meat of the draft is going to be, earlier. And I'm not saying that's like a surprise, but I do think that the later round picks, I think what you're going to see people do is look at what the undrafted free agent class has been the last couple of years. Look how much money and how competitive it's gone for some of these guys. I
Mhm.
think a lot of teams are going to be looking to get more 7th-round picks in order to go ahead and skip the line, so to speak. And I don't think that should be, swept under the rug, because I do think it will affect people's draft strategies. But anyway, by the way, Steve, 2009, it was Ron Brace who I was thinking of
Ron
from Boston
Brace.
College.
Yeah,
Yeah. I believe he passed away, didn't he?
I think so.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, it was Ron Brace at 40, Darius Butler 41 overall, Sebastian Vollmer 58, and then Brandon Tate. Remember where Brandon Tate was from?
Was he from Miami?
No, University of North Carolina.
Oh,
But but because he tore his ACL, I'm pretty sure his last year in school, which is why he was in the 3rd round. And I still remember his kick return against the Bengals in his rookie year. He was skilled, but just couldn't put it all together. Anyway,
well,
that was a random sidetrack,
well,
but I needed to figure out the 2009 draft class in order to properly come around.
well. I can't finish up cornerbacks without mentioning a guy I used in my first mock draft, and he has the best name in college football, Storm Duck. And
talk about
he's a big kid. He's like 6'1", 200 pounds, uber aggressive, which you have to be careful with that. But he the big knock on him was he lacks that elite top end speed to stick with guys down the field. But I mean, he has the best name in football, and somebody has to draft him, because we got to be talking about Storm Duck on draft during the draft, I should say.
An elite name.
Yeah.
Elite name. Yeah.
Yeah.
No question. No question about it. Does the Kyle Duggar, I guess, extension, does that change anything in your mind about the safety position?
Well,
Not a trick
it
question, just
changes
curious.
it to the fact that they're still now very deep there. They have him, Jabril Peppers. I granted they lost a couple of guys, but they still have
Josh Bledsoe's still there for another
yeah,
year or so.
and people forget about him because he's barely played, but there's a reason they hung on to him. He's a really good football player. He just hasn't had the opportunity because they've been so deep at safety. So I've always liked him, and I think he's going to get more work this year. But I still think if they would, if they were to draft a safety, it would be a guy that can play center field. And not necessarily have to start on day one. They can still rotate their guys back there who they have. You know what I mean? So,
yeah, I totally agree.
And because I think Duggar and Peppers are best where they're at, kind of in the box safeties, dime linebacker. They can each do that. And they're great tacklers and super good playmakers. So, I don't think it's like they have to get a free safety. They have to, if one that they like becomes available to them in the middle to late rounds, I think they'll absolutely jump on it.
I agree. It'll be interesting to see what the style they play. I mean, there's a lot of different options in this safety class. I wouldn't say the safety class is very good, or especially deep. There are some. I think there's one or two players at the top, and then I think that the meat of the safety class is really kind of about like what kind of style you kind of want, and there are some projects. There are some guys like, for example, Sion Vaki from Utah is someone who I really, really like. He also played running back. Well, so with him specifically, and I'm just using him as an example because it was the first guy I could think of. I think that he could be a day 3 selection for the Patriots, potentially be a safety prospect, and I think he could instantly help out on special teams. Just especially with the new kickoff rules, Steve. I do think running back, in the past, you've seen a lot of like your Jalen Reagor types being your kickoff returners. I think with the new rules, they could look more to running backs, actually, just given kind of like the short area quickness and things like that. Vaki averaged like almost 10 yards a carry at Utah, and when he played, and they would kind of mix him around and whatever. I think he's the kind of versatile player that kind of catches my eye in that day 3 range. He's one of my favorite players, like at the position in the class. I just think he's intriguing. Anyone stick out to you right off the rip?
Well, and again, I don't know whether he'd be there when they'd want to pick a safety.
No idea. I have no idea.
Because the one guy I like is Kalen Bullock out of USC.
Mm-hmm.
Just a really, really good ball hawk. He can play man coverage. He's possibly the most complete safety, in the draft this year. And, I think he's going to go probably early 3rd round. And I just don't see them taking a safety that early. But I really like his game. We mentioned Javon Bullitt from Georgia, who I think is, he's such a good football player. You can kind of plug him in at corner or safety.
Well, the nice thing about Bullock too, Steve, is the fact that I feel like he can cover a lot of ground, and for what they really need on this team compared to complement the other guys, he could be a player, like you said, that you could kind of stash, and maybe he sits a year or whatever because they have the flexibility to do that. But he's a different kind of safety than what they have on the roster, and he can really move all over the board. I mean, he started, if I'm not mistaken, I could be mixing it up, but I'm pretty sure he started at cornerback when he got to USC, and then he transitioned back, and I think safety will be where he fits. But he doesn't really have the hips to play corner, but he can move all over the field. I mean, if you watch any of him, it felt like he was literally in the deep third. All of a sudden, he's by the line. He's on the outside. He's in the middle of the field. I just feel like he was everywhere on the field.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I just think he's such a good ball hawk back in the field, and if you drop him in that deep safety role where you can see the play in front of him, I think that he'd be a really nice fit for the defense. I just don't know whether they'd want to draft him that early,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have a hard time. I mean, in general, with the safety class, I have a hard time projecting where they're going to go. I mean, I think Tyler Newton. I mean, do you like Tyler Newton from Minnesota?
Yeah, I think he's let me check my notes again. The kid from Minnesota.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, he's a big guy.
I think he's the best. Well, my point, I wasn't trying to trip you up. My point was, I think he's the best in the class. And I have no idea where he's going to go. I really don't. I mean, could he go in the first round? Like, I could see Green Bay taking him in the first round, potentially. I think I don't have it in front of me, but I think they're right around pick 26. Like, I think or something like that. I could see them going there, but I could see him going in the middle of the second round. But he's the first guy off the board. I mean, I can't tell. Like Cam Kitchens from Miami. I mean, Cam Kitchens from Miami, he had such a bad combine that I think some people will put him on like the late third. And those are the top 2 or 3 guys in the class. So like where's the run gonna start? I have no idea. I think it's going to be a big day 3 running back and safety and slot corner kind of draft. And that's when I feel like the Patriots could potentially be looking into some of these guys.
Yeah, and another guy that popped up, I think it was Burned from Pat's Pulpit, talked about Dadrion Taylor Demerson out of Texas Tech.
Yes, love him. Actually,
yes.
I want to give credit. I'm going to give credit to him real quick. I want to give credit to my buddy Shane for pointing him out to me. And I hadn't really been paying attention to safeties too much. I talked about him before. He's a Packers fan. They lost Darnell Savage in free agency, so he's been looking at safeties, and he's like, dude, this guy plays like a firecracker. He is a fun player to watch, Steve. Really like him.
Yes. Yeah, and he's more in line with what you were thinking about at the time. Those slot, corner zone guys, who he just looks like a really, really good football player, elite athlete. I love that. I mean, what did he run in the 40? It was like 4.4, wasn't it?
I'll pull it up. I'll pull up my phone. I was just looking at him the other day.
4.41. I had it. I had it on my computer. So, 4.41 at the combine, and for a safety, that's really good speed.
Yep. 10-yard split. 10-yard split of oh geez, my phone's going off. 10-yard split of 1.52. Man, just he's a again, I guess firecracker is the way I want to describe him. I mean, he can literally he adds more pop than you expect. He's only 5'10", about 200 pounds, but he adds more pop than you expect. He can fly all over the field. I just love a guy that plays with his hair on fire on defense. And look, sometimes that works, sometimes that works out. I mean, Chase Winovich, for example, who was drafted out of Michigan, what was that, second or third round for the Patriots several years ago? He really didn't work out, but he did play with his hair on fire. Josh Uche did kind of has that same thing. There are some guys that just play with a little bit of a different edge, and I want my defensive backs or my defensive players in general to play like that, and he definitely brings that to the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a guy that I like him. I don't know where he'd go, probably in the middle rounds, like 4th or 5th. But that speed of his is kind of intriguing. So, but one thing I did want to mention when we're talking about safeties is that I really hope that they leave Marte Mapu at linebacker.
I'm glad you brought. Thank you for bringing this up.
Yeah, there's been some talk about moving him to free safety, and I mean, at times you could rotate him back there depending on what coverage they're throwing out there and the defense they're in. But I would really like to see him remain at linebacker. I don't want to see him move him to safety.
I just think he's such a linebacker. I mean, if they keep him at safety, I feel like. I guess if they keep him at safety, I'll be thinking that they must have tried him at linebacker, and he's just not projecting there or playing as well there as he is projected to be, or whatever. But man, I just feel like he'd be such a good complement to Bentley and gives you so much speed in that front seven, which I feel like they desperately need.
Yep.
And I would so much rather him come down to play with Bentley in the linebacker core, and then put. I'm not saying he's going to be this kind of player because it would be unfair, but a Devin McCourty type at free safety. Go find a guy who can play the field. Like if you want to go with some of these guys that we're talking about, you have the 6'2", 220 strong safeties and Duggar and Pepper. It's like you have the lumber. Joshua Bledsoe does the same thing. I don't know if he can play deep as well, but you and I both like Bledsoe a lot. We have for years. And I'll be curious to see what his role can be. But, I would so much rather Marte Mapu at linebacker, personally.
Yeah, same here. I just think, I'm hoping they don't entertain that and just, leave him there with the linebackers and take advantage of that sideline to sideline speed, which, like you said, would really benefit the defense overall.
Yeah, I agree. Any other player that you feel like you'd like to mention on this breakdown?
No, I think we covered all the guys I really like. I mean,
I agree. I'm sure there's I didn't mention Kamari Lassiter, who I really like. There's probably one or two guys, but we have two more shows before the draft. We can talk, because I feel like I don't know what you all who are listening are looking for, and please send tweets or comments or whatever if there's something specific that you want us to discuss. But I think we'll do, Steve and I, for the last, how many years have we been doing the mock draft, Steve? It's been a while.
Yeah. We've been doing really a mock draft since year 2 with Pat.
Yeah, so it's been like 10 years.
12 years. Yeah. Because it'll be 13 this year that we've been doing it. And we started it in the summer, so the draft was already over.
I can't believe it's been 13 years me talking to you. It's ridiculous. I'm sure you feel the same. You're like, I can't believe I've been talking to this idiot for 10 years. What are you doing? No, but Steve and I, the last show we do before the draft will be our first round mock draft. I'm sure I would like to take a segment of a show. I don't know how long, maybe 15 minutes. I'd like to go around, maybe kind of what I'll call pick up the crumbs of any guys we might have feel like we didn't talk enough about, or maybe we forgot or whatever, because there's a lot of positions, a lot to talk about. So I'm actually traveling the rest of the week because I have a funeral. So we won't do another show this week. Not that we normally do, but we want to get more content around the time of the draft because there's a lot to talk about. And we're working and efforting to get some kind of a guest on here for next week, because I'd like to pick one or two people's brains other than our own. I would like to do a mailbag potentially too in that. So again, if you're listening, or if you're listening to this, via podcast or YouTube later, our Twitter handles are right under our pictures here. And so feel free, send them a question, send us a question. I'd love to answer it on the show if you have any. Yeah, I mean, Steve, I'm excited, man. I mean, we're getting really, really close. Part of me, like I mentioned at the top of the show, feels like, Jesus, can we just get this draft over so we can stop prognosticating and start analyzing the guys they pick? I'm excited. I'm nervous, all at the same time. How are you feeling?
Yeah, same here. I mean, I've been ready for the draft since probably the week after the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we started. I mean, honestly, I've made this joke before, and it's not really a joke. I watch college football, but I don't really start diving into players and stuff until usually after the Patriots season's over. This year, I started in October, unfortunately, because that's just kind of how the year went. And I just feel like I'm just so anxious just to kind of get it over with, so to speak. And I'm really curious. Honestly, Steve, what I'm more curious about than anything is what direction Elliott Wolf and Gerard Mayo go, and how it seems to have differed from Bill and what he brought to the past, in the past. So that'll be kind of intriguing to me, just to see. Again, we won't know for a couple of years what things trend like, but I will be curious to see if it's like for example, Sion Vaki from Utah, the safety that plays running back sometimes. Like that could have been a Bill pick where he's like he can play special teams, he can move around, comes from a pretty good program at Utah. Like, I don't know if Gerard and Elliott will value that. I'll be really interesting, to see. The Patriots had TCU tight end Jared Wiley on a top 30 visit the other day. He looks like a Green Bay Packer tight end in terms of, big, physical, athletic. They just took two tight ends in I think the third round or fourth round, last year. Like, that's where Elliott Wolf comes from. Like, do we see crossovers into that regime? I just feel like that's going to be so fun to discuss that discourse after the draft's over.
Yeah, I think we'll see a lot of that.
Yeah.
I mean, the jury's still out, but, I don't see Wolf or Alonzo Highsmith going anywhere. We'll talk about that maybe next week.
Yeah.
But I think those guys are going to put their stamp on things this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good idea. We can't talk about that next week. So, look, today's Tuesday, April 9th. We usually do the show Wednesday at noon Eastern. We did the show 24 hours earlier because, again, I'm traveling for family reasons, the rest of the week. So next week, we'll be back on Wednesday like we normally do. Again, we're going to try to get a guest, whether Steve and I do our own show and then maybe release a separate show with just the interview, or we mix the interview in with the show. We'll figure that out later. That's to be determined. Until then, Steve, anything else you want to mention as we wrap up?
No, just thanks for everyone who's always watching and, reading our stuff. And, we hope you stick with us through the draft, because this one is going to be interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of twists and turns.
I do too. And I can't tell if I'm excited or if I'm going to throw up. Okay. We've had a lot.
Well, we do that. Actually, we do both every year during the draft.
Pretty much.
So,
we didn't get a lot of comments today, which is surprising, but we did have a lot of viewers. So I'm happy everyone could join. Anyone who's tuned in live, I appreciate that. And obviously I frequently get a lot of comments later from people who listen to the podcast, and it's always great. We have a really, there's a lot of really good Patriots fans that we interact with online. A lot that you and I both know personally too, and it's a fun time. This is a fun time of year. I just think people are just kind of getting anxious, and when I say people, I mean myself as well. I'm very anxious. I'm like chomping at the bit, Steve, ready to see what they're going to do. But for Steve Balistrieri, I'm Derek Havens. I want to thank everyone for tuning into this week's episode of Patriots 4th and 2. Again, please subscribe to us on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. Like, share, leave us a review. Keeps us high in the podcast ranking so other Patriots fans can find us. Again, we're recording this Tuesday this week, but next week we'll get back to our regular time, Wednesday, noon Eastern. Looking forward to it, and hopefully we'll get a good guest for you guys. Feel free to send us some questions, and we'll see you guys next week. Talk to you then.